one thing that every living organism needs to survive. That same thing every farm and ranch needs to survive. That's water. Today I'm excited as we discuss how the Farm Bureau can pave the way in our industry for long-term solutions to water management.
Water. It impacts us all as agriculture produces. Heck, we're even made mostly up of water. As an old adage learned around a branding circle was that the whiskeys we're drinking and the waters we're fighting. I hope we can find some common ground on water issues across the state and come up with some actual boots on the ground solutions as Farm Bureau organization.
Water is a necessity not only of life but of agriculture. As simple as it may be, as common as it is, it has unique qualities and potential issues when we look at the regions of the country and of North Dakota specifically. I look forward today, speaking as a Farm Bureau, to see how we can address some water management issues and specifically how they pertain to North Dakota.
From the valley of eastern North Dakota to the badlands of western North Dakota, each county's water challenges are equally different. I look forward to discussing with my fellow colleagues today how Farm Bureau can help bring light to water issues and how to prevent disaster for each farmer in each county. Thank you.
Mia, Madison, Chance, do you have a personal example of how water issues have impacted either your operations or your education or something that you've been a part of?
That's a great question to start, Thomas. Myself being a livestock producer in western North Dakota, rural water, getting access to rural water, that's a huge issue in our area. The past few years, this recent year being a wetter year, some of the issues were a little different, but typically in western North Dakota, we struggle with having enough water, whereas per se, you probably being from the eastern state, have the opposite problem. How do you think at the state level we can manage these such drastic differences to come up with some common ground for producers as ourselves to deal with the same water issues?
No, that's a great question. I think you're right. I think you guys maybe sometime on the west side can argue about getting enough water where we get too much sometimes, and it seems it's funny that we're arguing about the same thing but quite differently. One time I had the opportunity to go down to the San Luis Valley in Colorado, and I got to go to a water board meeting in that area. And they had a discussion there because they realized and they announced that if they kept using water the same way they would, in 50 years their area would be out of water. In that area everything's irrigated. So they understood that needs need to be changed, things need to be changed in order to have sustainability. And I think they are implementing things down there. I think it's the same thing up here. We have to realize what changes need to be made in North Dakota and nationally, but how the Farm Bureau can impact that and be a part of these different changes, because we want sustainable farming and ranching for generations to come.
So I guess, Thomas, on the east side, how have you been practicing that and implementing some of these sustainable practices with your water?
Well, one thing we want to do is maintain and use all the water that we can in a correct way. On our farm and in our area, a very new and upcoming thing that a lot of people are using that's been very helpful is we do a lot of drain tile. And so what we do is that way that when we get too much rain on the farms, that the drain tile takes away that rain so we don't lose too much, because like you said, we get a lot of rain. So then we can get that drain tile out and use that so we don't have too much drowned out. But what's neat that's become a part that I think needs to be discussed more and shown if the Farm Bureau could figure out a way to do this is often in the eastern side in the Red River Valley, this drain tile, which is pumping out the excess water, is putting it into holding ponds. And those holding ponds are used now to irrigate fields. It's a great way to efficiently use the water that's God-given and to be able to efficiently water and to efficiently grow our crops in our area. How about you, Madison? In your area, anything like that been used?
So we have more of a predominant, actually quite a mix of livestock and crops. And recently with the drought that had happened here a couple of years ago, we had some wells or some watering holes where the cattle go dry. And we had issues with ranchers having to drill deep wells. And that cost and finding the locations where it was accessible by the most amount of cattle within the pens, that came in with some rotational grazing, of course, and everything to kind of manage some of our water issues. Mia, can you explain some things maybe you've seen? You know, where are you from in the state?
Yeah, I'm actually from 20 miles north of here, and I'm going to school in Dickinson. So I have seen basically all you can see for water issues. On this side of the state, we struggle with too much water, and like you mentioned, drain tile is a huge part of the east side of the state. On the other hand, on the west side of the state, you see a few pivots, or you see people trying no-till to retain whatever water they can get in a year. I am curious if we can come up with a way for people to be able to afford to dig those large wells or put in pivots or drain tile. Is there something Farm Bureau can do? A Chance, do you have any ideas?
Oh yeah, I think on that point, we've really identified that there are some drastic differences regionally within the state. So I think going forward as Farm Bureau as an organization, we obviously already have, district representatives that work at Farm Bureau. That I think that might be a good kickoff point to really start, because in southwestern North Dakota is going to be way different than northeastern North Dakota of what issues we're going to deal with. Because if you have, per se, at a annual meeting or a Farm Bureau event like this with people all over the state, to have maybe even a discussion about water issues, you're going to have such a vast thing. I don't think you're going to be really able to hammer down any concrete ideas that we can do. So I guess, Madison, what do you think? Do you think at the local level, what could we implement at the local level? You think that would really make some concrete ideas we could use to implement management of water?
Yeah, well, it's a great point that, exactly like we've all kind of highlighted, it's different within the different areas of North Dakota. And you bring up districts, and districts is an awesome way, I think, that you could utilize some of these conversations. Within the districts, they tend to be very similar. Maybe from one end of the district to the other, it could be a little bit different, but still it's going to be a lot of the same processes. And I think having that conversation, and a large part is providing the resources, connecting them with on the county level, maybe some of the county commissioners even. They have some of those networking and those connections. But you also talk about cost and, how does that look? And that maybe could be a bridge to the lenders or to individuals within, and I guess connecting to Farm Bureau staff. These are individuals, especially as we work on resolutions and policy within the Farm Bureau, there's always those talking points being brought up. I guess, what do you
No,
guys think?
I think that's great, Madison. I think that to stay on the point of water issue, I think you could summarize that is in a way of reduction of greenhouse gases or carbon neutral. The general population, that seems to be a big deal, especially nationally. I know that 200 of the biggest companies in the world have agreed to be carbon neutral by 2040. And that sounds big, but what that means is that this idea of sustainability and using your water wisely, it's not going anywhere. And so it says a lot of us as Farm Bureau of being on top of using our water wisely to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Using our water efficiently is a very important way to do that. I think maybe as a Farm Bureau here in the state of North Dakota, wonder if there's a way that we could champion ways that water being used efficiently is already being done here in the state. We mentioned this about using wells wisely, or doing some sort of drain tile and reusing that for irrigation, or making sure that you manage waters wisely on ranches. Wouldn't it be neat if we could tell the general public a way of maybe sharing those stories with people as a Farm Bureau? What do you think of that, Chance?
I think that's a good idea. I know from my perspective, drain tile is foreign to me as Farmers Union. It's something I don't know anything about. I have no experience with it. Don't live anywhere near there's any drain tile. So I think, maybe to bring some perspective on, for me, maybe your Farm Bureau member, would you be willing to come out and show, at your operation, what you do with drain tile? What issues do you face? So that at the state level, we could find some common ground on how to manage this water. Would that be something, you think you'd be open to?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, the generational farms and ranches in the state of North Dakota, it's a testament to the efficient use of resources. To be a 3, 4 generation, 5 generation farm or ranch, you've got to be sustainable at the least, but at your core you have to be sustainable. So these guys are doing it. They understand the importance of that. So if we can champion that and explain that to other people that we're doing what we can, I think that would go a long way in the eyes of the public. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea for us to make sure we're using our water wisely. You mentioned kind of like an incentive almost, is kind of what you're talking about. Could Farm Bureau do an incentive for we're using water efficiently? Like maybe a program where you get certain buybacks or paybacks for that, however that works. Is that possible?
Yeah, the Farm Bureau does a great job on a legislative level of maybe getting some sort of government involvement in that aspect. Maybe we don't want to be the first ones to push government involvement, but if that's where the world's going, maybe we need to be on the forefront of that and do what's best for the Farm Bureau in that way.
So I'm going to pose this question then. Talking about Farm Bureau involvement, what about more of an educational side to things too? We have very different ways that water can be managed, very different ways that it could affect an operation, whether it be livestock or crops. You talk about too much water, you talk about too little water. What about erosion? And, looking at pollution and all of the different chemicals that can go into sometimes what we're giving right back into the things that we eat and produce. What about like an educational kind of standpoint on maybe how to mitigate and manage some of these things that aren't necessarily, hey, you need to contract someone and have this cost immediate upfront, but little ways that someone can manage. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's an absolute great idea, Madison. I think that at the state level, coming back to that basic knowledge and education of understanding the water issues, I think that would be a really good idea, maybe doing, whether it be a breakout session, having a speaker come in on it, just to really identify some of those broad general things, and then getting individuals to understand the information, and then that way, I don't know, maybe going from there, taking that back to the local level, so then you can kind of individualize it for the region, whether it be a district or a county. What do you guys, Thomas, what do you think? Do you think this would work best at a district level, or maybe even we gotta go smaller? Maybe we gotta go to individual counties, individual, per se, water boards.
Well, one thing that's great about Farm Bureau is the grassroots that it really is, and it can get down to as local as city or town or county, and can reach as much as nationally. There definitely is when I think of education, I think of maybe the general public. I feel like there's a false narrative that the farmer is stealing from the ground, or he's trying to squeeze every inch of every drop of water out of his ground, where really what we're trying to do is we try to think generations down the road what can be best for our kids and our children's children. And so if there's some sort of education that the Farm Bureau could bring to the general public, I think that could really enlighten the general population of the country on what we're doing.
I think that's a great point, Thomas. Do you think that maybe going back to, it could be kind of hard to, I don't want to say publicize and get general public interested in something like that? Do you think that would be where, if we first inform the members and give the members that education, would that be a better perspective to then take to the general public, so that when so-and-so is talking to their neighbor in their local town, whether it be, in a town, a city as big as Fargo, or a small town in rural western North Dakota, that they can be able to address those issues with someone who's not in agriculture? I don't know, do you think that'd be a better starting point, or do you think?
I think that's a great idea, that our members know the importance of using water and all resources wisely, and that's the grassroots, that's the start, and then once they understand it, then it's much easier to share that with everyone else. What do you think about that, Mia?
I think it's a wonderful idea to educate both our Farm Bureau members and the public. I think it really comes down to events like this, where everyone gets together and we have these breakout sessions and the keynote speakers. It would be very doable for Farm Bureau just to have, two people from different sides of the states that made it work. Like, they have drain tile in, they're like, hey, this costs this much, like, we can help you finance it, or we started no-till and this is how we do it and this works. Like, I think, back to your point about education, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. And I love your idea of incentivizing. What's the incentive of learning and taking the time, because we all know how agriculturalists are. Time is money. And so incentivizing, hey, this is why you need to participate. It's actually pretty interesting. Recently I attended a Women in Ag event, and they had an individual speaking about their cattle herd and how they couldn't figure out why their fertility was low in their cow herd. Had no idea. Well, it took someone coming into their life and saying, hey, maybe your water's not being managed right. And sure enough, they did a test on the water, and it turned out that's why some of the fertility rates were low. They ended up transferring those cattle or those cows into a different pasture, and it was they didn't have another miscarriage after that. So education, definitely, I love that. Have you guys had anything individually that you've seen? You mentioned drain tile earlier.
Yeah, no, that's deep to think of that, because you would never think to correlate water with the fertility of a cow. But that right there is a reminder of how water is pivotal for every aspect of our farms and ranches. I think about how our fertilizer on our farm, I know that it comes all the way up from the Gulf of Mexico on barges up the Mississippi River, all the way to North Dakota. So if that water is frozen or something's wrong, and there's an example right there that's water that we don't even think about how that has an impact, or our crops going to the Pacific Northwest and to Japan or China. Water is just in so many avenues, different aspects. I read an article that GM and Honda were together are open a plant in Michigan to produce hydrogen cells in replace of diesel fuel, and the only byproduct of it is water vapor. But that is an example of long-term efficiency with water use, and so what they're doing there is an example how water issues aren't going anywhere. Efficiency and what's best for the environment's not going anywhere. So I think we're doing a great job discussing as Farm Bureau how we can be on top of that and do our part. So I don't know, what do you think about that, Chance? If there's any other ways, or how we can take this all together to figure out what the best way to solve these water issues is.
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. Please put down your pens, and in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1-minute closing statements.
When it comes down to it, water is what makes it or breaks it, whoever you are. Today we discussed a lot of great points about education, incentives, and how water can be used on your ranch literally everywhere. I look forward to maybe later discussing how we can implement incentives and educational opportunities for our Farm Bureau members, as it is the most important part of our farming and ranching lives. Thank you.
Water obviously is a massive issue for all of us involved in agriculture. I think we just hit the tip of the spear with this discussion. We did touch on a few things that I think as North Dakota Farm Bureau we can start implementing at the state and local level to help not only inform our own members but our general public about the issues we deal with water. Some of the things is managing it sustainably and informing members how they can maybe do some things better and be able to continue to use water as a precious valuable resource into the future. Yeah.
What a great conversation. We started with a question of water management and how Farm Bureau can help. We started at a state level, and the amount of information we just covered from east to west, from the local level, we definitely have a great sounding board to go off of, starting with incentives, education. Really, it all comes down to how do we start this conversation and how do we inform others? How do we tell our stories and keep going? And thank you guys for a great discussion. I think this is something that we can grow off of, and I look forward to seeing how all four of us in Farm Bureau and Farm Bureau itself tackles water management.
This has been a joy to discuss. Water truly does impact every aspect of farming and ranching. Even as Madison mentioned, fertility of livestock. That's a testament of the importance of this issue at hand. When I think about one thing that I enjoy as being a fourth generation farmer is learning from my dad. My dad never taught me what to do, but as he lived, I watched him, and that's how I knew what to do. I think for us as an example, we have an opportunity to be a good steward and to be on the forefront and to pave a path for the importance of water issues and sustainability issues. And I've really enjoyed discussing and diving in deeper into what that can look like.
Let's show the contestants an appreciation for a job well done.